Great. Well, thanks to everyone for being here. My name's Justin Logan. I'm the Director of Programs and a Research Fellow here at the Center for the Study of Statesmanship at Catholic University. And it's really my great pleasure, although albeit via Zoom, to introduce Ambassador Mick Mulvaney, the U.S. Special Envoy for Northern Ireland. Ambassador John Michael Mick Mulvaney was sworn in as U.S. Special Envoy for Northern Ireland in May of this year. Prior to this appointment, Ambassador Mulvaney served in President Donald Trump's cabinet as acting White House Chief of Staff and concurrently as Director of the Office of Management and Budget. He previously served as the acting director of the CFPB, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, from November of 17 to December of 18. Ambassador Mulvaney previously represented South Carolina's 5th District in the House of Representatives from 2011 to 2017. And he sat in the South Carolina General Assembly from 2007 until 2011. Before entering public service, he practiced law and worked in his family's real estate business. Ambassador Mulvaney holds a bachelor's degree from Georgetown University's Walsh School of Foreign Service and a law degree from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. He's married and has 3 children. And his interlocutor today on the Northern Irish question and the U.S. role in it is Professor David Walsh, my colleague here at Catholic University, where he's a professor of politics. His research focuses on the field of political theory, broadly conceived, and he's published a number of books on topics ranging from liberalism to the overarching philosophical horizons of modernity. And he's at work on a 2-volume exploration of the centrality of the person to society and politics, the first of which has already been released. His bachelor's and master's degrees are from the University College Dublin, and his PhD is from UVA, the University of Virginia. So with that, I think I'll turn things over to Ambassador Mulvaney for some sort of opening comments and to sort of set the table for the discussion. And then Professor Walsh will jump in as his interlocutor to discuss things further. So with that, Ambassador Mulvaney, thank you so much.
Got it. I got it. All right, good. Can you hear me now? Yeah, for some reason it said I could not unmute myself, which I'm sure many of my staffers over the years wish is a control they had. So, Justin, thanks for having me. David, I look forward to the chat. I thought what we do is talk a little bit. Obviously, the 800-pound gorilla in the room is not only the election, but its impact on affairs overseas. So let me give a short summation of my work so far as the special envoy. And then we can talk a little bit about the election. Just take questions. I'll let David sort of drive that because I'm not really sure. I've given the same spiel now a dozen times. I'm not sure what's interesting to people and what's not. But I was able to finally go over to Northern Ireland. I actually went in February when I was still chief of staff. It's not gone widely reported. By the way, are there reporters on the call, Justin? Are we on the record? Are we off the record? What's the status here? Like on the record?
Since we're recording it, probably.
That's fine. Okay, good enough. I can't hear him, but that's maybe I accidentally muted him. That's fine.
Yeah.
Was that the president and I had talked about this move for quite some time. In fact, when I first took the job as chief of staff, it was only for 6 months because I had asked for the job of special envoy once the CFPB work had completed. And the president asked me to be chief of staff on an active basis for 6 months. I ended up staying 15. But I knew that after impeachment was over that we were going to be transitioning over to Mark Meadows, who's a good friend of mine. And so I took advantage of sort of the interim period to spend some time in Belfast, in Dublin and in London. Had a chance to meet with all of the key players, including very interestingly, an interesting story. I met with my then counterpart, Sir Edward Lister, the chief of staff to Boris Johnson. We talked about COVID. That makes a fascinating story. But I wasn't able to get back again then until September. Fate intervened in a couple of different ways, not the least of which was COVID, but certainly not the only one. And I wasn't able to go. I had hoped to go as early as May 1st to talk primarily about what was of interest to me, which was not only getting up to speed and beginning to make the relationships and so forth, but also talk about economic development. In speaking with my predecessors, specifically Richard Haas and Mitchell Reese, one of whom I know and one of whom I have mutual friends with, what they encouraged me to do was to just try and be friends with everybody, and when you're not, be equally unfriendly to everybody. And I thought that was good advice. In fact, after the first trip, when I came back, after the last trip, the only trip I made as the envoy came back, I was accused in one paper of being a shill for Sinn Féin, and in the other paper being a shill for the DUP. So I figured I probably cut it right down the middle the way it's supposed to be. But we did finally manage to go over in September. Unfortunately, not as much focus on economic development as I had hoped because of COVID. Certainly we had those discussions. But it was mostly about Brexit and about the impact of the internal markets bill that had just been introduced prior to my visit. Along the same time of my trip, my good friend Richie Neal and other members of the Irish caucus sent a letter suggesting to the British government that to the extent the IMB damaged the Good Friday Agreement, the Good Friday Belfast Agreement, that they would hold Britain accountable when it came to the negotiations of the United States-UK Free Trade Agreement, which is currently being negotiated by the United States Trade Representative's Office. I don't disagree with that letter, by the way. In fact, I talked to Richie about it, had long conversations with him and with Peter King and David Joyce and Brendan Boyle, and said, look, it's entirely consistent with this administration's position that if you do damage to the Good Friday Agreement, undermine what we've invested in it, what so many other people have invested in it, that clearly there's a price to pay when it comes to the US-UK Free Trade Agreement. The only difference was that I was not willing to assume that the Internal Markets Bill would automatically do that. I read the bill. I knew the bill was a contingency for what might happen if there's a no-deal Brexit. And when you have multiple contingencies like that, I'm not as willing as Richie was to sort of to assume the worst, let's say. But that's fine. I thought Richie's letter was well done and actually helpful to me in my discussions. But anyway, I went over then with that background of the IMB, the discussions about a potential border, with the idea towards focusing on preventing a border by accident. I was convinced, remained convinced that nobody really wants a border across the island of Ireland, and that they were going to work to make sure that did not happen. My fear was that there would be this inevitable cascading domino effect of events where the British do something, the Irish do something, Europeans do something, all of a sudden we have either a de facto or a real border across the island. After 2 days in Dublin, 3 days in Belfast, 2 days in London, I left much more comfortable that not only were people more concerned about it than I even realized or expected going in, but not that concerned that that was going to be a likely outcome. Excuse me for just a second while we have a jet. I apologize. I see to my elderly parents, they have the fortune of living in Key West, Florida. The bad news is we live right at the end of the Naval Air Station runway. So that's going to be happening on and off. I apologize. But in talking about the border, it was Simon Coveney, I think, who summarized it the best out of many good summations when he said, look, Mick, before anybody puts up a border, there's a lot more levers the Europeans can pull to bring pressure on the Brits than threatening to force a border, put up a border, whatever you have across the island of Ireland. They specifically mentioned commercial aviation. And I buy that. I did buy that. It makes sense to me. There's a lot of downside involved for all players over potentially putting a border across the island. I also left leaving the Europeans, especially didn't want that. The Europeans perceive Northern Ireland and the way the issues were resolved, the Good Friday Belfast agreements, as a success story in recent European history as to how to resolve internal conflicts. And they don't want to undermine that by pressuring anybody into putting up a border. So for a variety of reasons, we can talk about more in the Q&A if you like, I left not nearly as concerned as I was before I went over about a border by accident. I also left, by the way, with a much more sanguine outlook on the likelihood of a British EU agreement and against a no-deal Brexit. I understand it's still a possibility. It's been mentioned as a possibility as recently as today in the press. In fact, I think it gets mentioned as such every single day. But I really was convinced that everyone perceives it to be in their own political best interests to have a deal. My experience in politics, my experience in life is that deals are easier to get when everybody wants one. And I got the impression that everybody wants one and perceives it to be politically good for them to get one. The converse of that is they perceive it to be politically bad for them to not have one. So you can imagine politicians who like keeping their jobs generally would be inclined to do things that would allow them to keep their jobs. So if they think that a deal is good for them politically, it makes it more likely that some type of deal will be achieved. I believe that it would be more along the lines of a skinny deal, a limited deal, maybe dealing with the flow of goods, some things on state aid and fishing. But from a Northern Irish perspective, those are really some of the big issues that affect the island of Ireland. And that the flow of services, while important, not exactly as critical, central as, like, say, the flow of goods could be. So that was good news as well. We also talked a little bit when I was there about the legacy issues, the resolution of some of the troubles, investigations, and so forth. Had a very, very interesting and productive meeting with John Butcher, who runs the, I can never remember, the Canova project, which seems to be, knock wood, a successful administration of an investigation into some malfeasance during the Troubles. I got all kinds of input from the British government about why they think the Canova project is limited. I had some questions about how it might be limited. Generally speaking, it looks to be a nascent type of success story and may provide the at least a framework for discussions about further work on that front. Very much at the same time being aware of the concerns that the British government has about this, the structure of Canova and its records-based system, which the British government believes unfairly prejudices them. Again, I get it. I understand the issues, but I was mildly, more than mildly, impressed with the work that Mr. Butcher had been doing. All in all, a really good trip. By the way, I don't know if anybody watching this is interested in going into the Foreign Service, but if you are, you should get to know the people on this phone, on this call, who do it in Northern Ireland. Ian and Drew and Dale, and especially Elizabeth Trudeau, our Consul General, some of the best government workers I've worked with in a long time, and anybody interested in going into that field will be well served by talking to them about how they got to be where they are, because they're really good at what they do and they're very helpful to me. So I don't know, David, if that's a good tee up for questions or not. I have no idea. Like I said,
that's great.
I've done this so much, I don't want to bore you. And I know some of you want to talk about the election anyway, and I didn't even talk about that, but that's fine. So I'll turn it over to you and do whatever you want to do.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Ambassador. And that's a wonderful summary of the great work that you've been doing. Thank you for all of your wonderful service, especially to my home country of Ireland, and representing the US in such a noble role, I think, in international affairs. This is a singular, the Good Friday Agreement and the role of the US in getting it going, supporting it, and so on, has been, just an amazing act of just fraternity, friendship, and goodwill, and a sort of shining example of what diplomacy can do at its very best. So thank you for being part of that. Let me just run back a little bit and ask you, I mean, since it's a complicated scene over there, and you've done an amazing job, I think, in terms of getting it, understanding the players, understanding who's involved, and playing an important role in it. Could you maybe, just for the sake of clarifying for people who are not so familiar with the issue, how is it possible for the border, a border to be created accidentally? Which is kind of the phrase that you see in the media, all right? And when I was growing up in Ireland, we always had a border, because whenever my father went up to the north of Ireland, he had to bring back special candy and chocolate and stuff that we couldn't get in the south, But so the notion of a border was not that terribly unusual. But now, after there's this whole opening up, clearly nobody wants to have it. So if nobody wants it, how can it occur accidentally?
Yeah, and David, obviously, but my roots don't go as deep as yours do, or at least they're not as recent. But I remember crossing the border when I was in college after I graduated in 1989. I was
Yeah.
on a bus from Dublin to Enniskillen, went through the sheet metal tunnels into the no man's land, surrounded by the
Yeah.
razor wire, and had the guards with the German
Yeah.
shepherds get on the bus with automatic weapons. And then I went back in February of this year and drove across it like I would be driving from, in fact, not even from North Carolina to South Carolina,
Yeah.
because in a couple different directions there's not even any sign. I think one way
Yeah.
there is a sign,
Yeah.
the other way there isn't. And I think that's the result of a lot of hard work. That was an
Yeah.
affirmative decision to get to that point. People forget that many reasons for the origin of the Troubles and so forth. I'm not going to go into Irish history
Yeah.
here, except to say that the border did play an interesting part in the modern Troubles that begin in the 1960s. There was a border posts up. Folks were Republican-minded folks would shoot at the signs. The
Yeah.
British would put out soldiers to protect the signs. People would shoot at the soldiers, and all of a sudden you have what you have, right? So that it was a touchstone, a flashpoint that led to bigger and worse things.
Yeah.
So what do I mean by a border? Everybody says, I don't want a border, I don't want a border, I don't want a border, and I believe that. But the example I ran through for Simon Coveney was this: the British leave under a no-deal Brexit. This is a hypothetical. Okay, so now a good in Belfast going down to Dublin would technically be coming from outside the European Union, inside the European Union. The British might look at that and say, well, we should put up a border then, but they would never, ever do that. The Irish, for the same reason, would do it because they know what a hard border entails. It's a lot more than just a check on a good coming across the border. Then you've got to say this good could have come from Belfast into Dublin, not subject to whatever tariffs apply, not subject to whatever health checks might apply. And the Europeans are looking at this good going, we can't allow this into the continent of Europe. So we'll have to put a ring up around the whole island. And the Irish would object to that and say, well, that's discouraging, that's disadvantaging our domestic Irish businesses who have every right to trade with the island or with the mainland. And then the Europeans might pressure them to prevent those goods from coming in to Ireland in the first place, to the Republic in the first place, so as to protect the larger European market. And now you're watching the dominoes fall, and somebody says, well, we have no choice but to put one up. That's one that ends up in reality, but no one wanted it, but it's there. That's what I meant by a border by accident.
Right. Yeah.
And I do really think that the awareness is so high. By the way, and I don't know the average age of the people on this call, but I raised this with just about everybody on the trip. I'm absolutely convinced that when it comes to the British, the Northern Irish, who are also British, and the folks who live in the Republic, that they completely understand and importantly remember what the Troubles were, why they were, the impact they had, because it was a lived history for them. And certainly that's the case for folks who live in Europe who are my age, but to the extent you have younger leaders now, maybe in their 30s, early 40s, that maybe learned history and not the same, and may not have the same gravity. But it was explained to me in ways that had credibility, that even younger European leaders today recognize the fact that a border across the island of Ireland is something that everybody can and should be working against taking place.
Right. Well, just to follow up on that, in some ways, the internal market bill that the British government introduced was an effort to deal with that contingency. But it seems to have generated more suspicion, at any rate, if not mistrust. It's not clear that they intended to do something rather hostile, but it was certainly greeted in that way, certainly in the South, and even in the European context. The European Union seems to have taken a rather you could say, a dim view of that initiative.
That's fair. That's fair.
So what do you make of was that a good faith effort, or was it in some way an unwise initiative at the best?
Despite my political background, I'm not one of those who tends to believe that I can read the minds of others. So when people ask me, did someone lie? I'm like, I don't know. Lying entails a certain mental condition but certainly something could have been not true. So if you ask me, was it done on purpose? I have no idea. Was it good faith? I'm not sure. Here's what I do know. As someone who has been in the public for a long time, given press conferences before, said things that are stupid, said things that are inartful, said things that are wrong that you need to go back and clean up. In fact, I think we just had an anniversary of one of those here not too long ago. I empathize with Brandon. I will not put words in his mouth, but I imagine that if they had to do it over again with the same piece of legislation, that it would have been presented differently. Let me give you an example. Instead of, when asking, is it going to break international law? Instead of saying yes in a limited and specific kind of way, you could say, people do that all the time. The Germans break the rules all the time. The Spanish break the rules all the time. And then there's a mechanism for getting everybody back into line. And he's right about that. Europeans are notorious for breaking the rules in small ways here and there. And it all manages to get worked out in the wash. Specifically, I think for a long time, many of them were violating their rules on how much deficit they can run, etc. So it doesn't mean you're an international pariah because you happen to not follow the rules in one particular circumstance. And I think if Brandon had explained it that way, it may have kept the temperature low. Again, that's my guess. My educated guess is somebody who's been down this road under different but similar circumstances. I gave everybody the benefit of the doubt and will continue to do so until they give me reason not to. My communication with Brandon has been excellent. He's always taken my calls. I have always taken his. He's been a very gracious host when I was there. I've met him when he was in DC before I was in the envoy position, was at the White House. And I have no reason to think that there's anything surreptitious or ulterior motives going on here at all. By the way, that statement goes for everybody on the trip. I was received very warmly by everybody, even folks I don't know. I didn't have a relationship with Simon Coveney, but I knew friends. I have a lot of friends who know him. I knew Leo Radker. I had friends, good friends of Michal Martin, even though I'd not met him personally. We had connections. I did not know Mary Lou, but I look forward to spending more time with her because I don't have as many connections as I would like. Michelle and Arlene had been very gracious. I met them when they were in the U.S. Right at the outbreak of COVID. Met them again in February before that. So no, no one has yet given me, and I'm pretty good at detecting BS. David, if you understand what I'm saying, I understand when politicians are lying to me because I've seen it once or twice. I get the impression that everybody here is shooting me completely straight, and that's a really pleasant environment to work in. So I know the press. I'll let other folks make decisions about good faith intentions and so forth. All I'm telling you is that, again, I'm still willing to give everybody the benefit of the doubt because they have given me a complete justification of doing so.
Yeah. What, just to press a little on that, what's the specific international law that you're referring to there? Isn't that the protocol? It's not in general a law, not a general law. It's a law specifically. It's a treaty specifically on Northern Ireland. So the protocol that's part of the withdrawal agreement.
It was an international agreement, and it was approved by Westminster, so it has the force of law. But yes, it's the Northern Irish Protocol. That's correct.
Yeah. So it's less than. It seems it's more. It threatens a more specific commitment that was made on the Northern Ireland, rather than a general rule about how the European Union gets run.
Yeah. Well, and the criticism was fair, in that it was done unilaterally. It was a deal that was negotiated bilaterally and then changed, potentially changed unilaterally. The same criticism, by the way, has been levied against the British in the Stormont House Agreement when it deals with legacy. That's a multi-party agreement that one party seeks to treat differently. Now, that being said, COVID does play a role there. And again, I'm willing to give folks the benefit of the doubt because everybody knows that COVID has taken up so much bandwidth, and properly so, especially in the devolved government of Northern Ireland. Yeah.
Well, if we give everybody the benefit of the doubt and think in terms of a positive direction here, did you get any sort of sense of the specifics of how? I mean, it really is a bit of a conundrum how essentially a part of the United Kingdom can be treated differently from the rest and thereby remain integral to the flow of goods and services and investment in Europe, in the European Union. I mean, yes, I know it's not an impossible problem to solve, but it seems to be something of a challenge.
It
Are there
is.
any ideas creatively that you?
Oh, specific ideas I won't go into because I know they're hammering those things out. But I think you've made an excellent point, which is that it's a thorny issue. But I work at it from the goal, the end goal backwards. Okay, which is that if this is done correctly, then Northern Ireland will be unique amongst all places in the world because it will be the only square miles of land on the face of the planet that will have completely unfettered access to the UK market and completely unfettered access to the European market. That is a high achievement if it's able to be done. Should that be hard to do? Yes, it should be hard to do. If that's the prize that you have, and imagine the benefits that will flow to Northern Ireland if it's done properly. But if that's the prize to be achieved, then it's probably understandable that it's not going to be easy to go get it, and you're going to have to work to do it. But I think folks there understand the potential that Northern Ireland has. For the first time in my lifetime, I think there's people at least starting to look at Northern Ireland and say, "Hold on, wait a second. This may be the best place in the whole world to be here if we're able to work this out soon." And that's something that's optimistic. It's energizing. It's invigorating, and I think it gives people the proper focus on getting it done. But no, it's not going to be easy. Nothing in Northern Ireland is. Listen, nothing in the world is easy right now. We're having a difficult time electing a president. So nothing is easy that's worth doing.
Yeah. Well. Let me be a devil's advocate just a little bit on that for a moment.
Sure.
If we think of Northern Ireland as carving out and having carved out for it this special status in Europe that is not shared by the rest of the United Kingdom as a result of the Brexit development, is there sufficient confidence on the ground there to support that? Because one of the reasons why Northern Ireland exists is because a majority of the population cannot abide the thought that they would live outside of the United Kingdom or be treated differently from anywhere else. This is why they're called unionists. They don't have any other goal in life than to remain united with the United Kingdom. That's their prime objective, however you think about it. If I was a unionist, I would be somewhat unsettled by such a move, because it's a halfway house towards independence or a federation or even a united Ireland.
A couple of different things to that, and you make some excellent points. I always enjoy pointing out to some of my former congressional colleagues when they ask me where my residence is in Northern Ireland. I point out to them there is no ambassador to Northern Ireland. It is part of the United Kingdom, and they look at me sort of sideways. And I'm like, guys, the official name of the country is the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. It is one country, and I think it is noteworthy that as much as many Americans focus on the North-South aspects of the Good Friday Agreement, a provision in the Good Friday Agreement specifically respects and acknowledges the unity of the United Kingdom. Does not seek, the Good Friday Agreement does not seek to undo that union. And to unionists, that's just as important as the parts that are important to many Irish Americans about the North-South lack of a border. So you're absolutely right. There would certainly be that issue. Here's the reason that I think that this is different on this one matter of the inclusion into the European Union. And that is because at this point, if that works out, it'll be like you're a member of the United Kingdom plus. You're actually treated better than the folks who are in Wales and in Scotland and in England. Typically what they're concerned about is being treated as second-class British citizens, and they don't have all the benefits because they're on a different island and so forth. And this is the type of situation where, again, if done properly, creates an opportunity where you get added benefit by being a British citizen who lives in Northern Ireland. Those are good problems to have. Those are things that I don't think create the same sort of difficulties as if you feel like you are disadvantaged by your geographic location. I could be naive about that, but that's my answer to your question.
Yeah. Yes. Well, you know, from an external perspective, that makes perfectly good sense. But the history of Ireland is really fraught with this sense that even though unionists are a majority in the north and do indeed control things, they see themselves as a minority. So they're always on the defensive in a way that it's hard for people outside of it to understand. The worst aspect is, of course, that they're also a minority in the United Kingdom. They, you know, their loyalty to the United Kingdom seems to be not reciprocated. You know, if I try to put myself in their position, and I think, yes, I'd be nervous about everything that happens.
And again, to the extent that that's something that touches on the interests of the United States, I think one of the roles of this position is to be available to help folks maybe deal with that anxiety if it exists.
Yeah. Well, that's where the United States was indispensable, I think, in the Good Friday Agreement, because none of the sides could trust one another sufficiently to be reassured about their future.
I think it's important. It's important for Americans to remember, though, because again, we do tend to look at the Good Friday Agreement in terms of its north-south. That just as every line in our Constitution is important, every line in that Good Friday Belfast Agreement is important, and the recognition and acceptance of the union of the United Kingdom is important as well. And I've certainly tried to bring that to bear in my dealings.
Yeah. Well, it also all of these issues fit into the wider pattern of political developments at the moment, the political reality at the moment, which is that separation and devolution are part of a kind of almost worldwide pattern that, especially in the United Kingdom itself. I mean, beginning in that era leading up to the Good Friday Agreement, you had the devolution of the various parts that Tony Blair was if not a promoter of, at least a willing sponsor of in many respects. How do you see that as playing into, you could say, this sort of fraught context of very, you know, mutually suspicious and difficult habits of cooperation, I think, in the United Kingdom?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head, which is that's the universal question just about now, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
They're dealing with it in the United Kingdom. They're dealing with it in Spain. They're going to deal with it between, say, Greece and Europe. I mean, this whole idea of devolution I don't know the answer to your question. There'll be people who write their PhD theses on this for generations, folks who write books about it for years to come. I don't know the answer to your question, other than to say is that's the way it is. The world is a divided place in a bunch of different ways right now, no more so than the United States, as evidenced by what happened on Tuesday night. We just work through it, right? I don't think it's any worse now than it ever has been. It may manifest itself in different ways. It may be magnified by things like social media. I'll move to American politics here for a second and give one example, which is my daughter. I have 3 20-year-olds. I have a daughter. She's a hardcore left-wing progressive. And she was lamenting the fact that things have never been this bad, that Donald Trump has made the country the worst it's ever been. And I'm like, sweetheart, the vice president shot the Treasury Secretary to death one time.
Yes.
And she sort of looked at me and realized we had just seen Hamilton, and she knew I'd caught her. Like, it's been bad, and we always seem to get through it. Devolution is tough, but they'll get through it. They just will. It's human nature, but it's also human nature to work through difficulties. And you just hope that there's enough folks who are empathetic, sympathetic, educated enough, able to listen to folks on the other side, able to communicate, able to have civil discourse. One of my favorite lines, I don't know if anybody ever saw the American series on the Civil War by Ken Burns. It was on PBS, just a masterpiece of theater and research. In the very, very first 5 or 10 minutes of the show, there was a question put to Shelby Foote, who has since passed away, but for generations here was seen as the leading authority on the American Civil War. He was a professor at the University of North Carolina, and he got asked what caused the Civil War. And well, of course, later on in the show, they talk about the role of slavery, and you can't obviously have that conversation without talking about slavery. But his initial reaction was it was a failure to do what Americans had done so well before, which was compromise, because the whole country was built on compromise. The reason we have the system of government we have is compromise. And for some reason, we lost the ability to do it at that point in time. On slavery was the unspoken topic at that point. But I think that's insightful. As long as we have the ability to talk to each other and compromise, we can get through things like devolution and like so many other things that face us. I'm sorry, I got way too philosophical on that.
No, that's fine. That's fine. That's fine.
Maybe it's the setting.
let me press you a little bit on the specifically Northern Ireland aspect here, because
Sure.
you also interacted with the political parties on the ground there, the DUP and Sinn Féin and others. I mean, one of the notable aspects in recent years has been that, in essence, the Good Friday Agreement effectively was suspended in terms of this devolution, that the Stormont basically ceased to function as a self-governing assembly for 3 years. And, it's probably people don't take much notice of that because they were not aware of what they were doing anyway. But it's like when the government shuts down, we don't all notice it right away. But it is noteworthy as something that is a complete breakdown at some level, and it was a breakdown over relatively minor issues. What I'm really asking is that a unique development in Northern Ireland because it has a unique it has a unique set of circumstances that, yes, they can take a holiday from governing themselves for 3 years because they have other governments to look after them in Westminster and to a much lesser extent in Dublin and in the European Union.
I don't know if I'm in a position to respond to that. Let me look at in the way that might be satisfying. Let me look at it the other way, which is that I think the fact that Stormont House did reconstitute just prior to the onset of COVID, hopefully could, if things work out, you could foresee a circumstance where you look back over the course of history and say, that was a seminal moment. And the fact that it was able to reconstitute in time to deal with COVID provided them a basis for fighting a common enemy, learning how to compromise, learning how to work together in ways that you might not have been able to encourage without that type of crisis. And many times the response to a crisis is a defining impact. Again, there I'm not naive. I've asked the question of the folks who live there if they think that some of the successes, and I do consider them to be successes of Stormont in dealing with COVID, would that carry over? I think everybody says, if I have to summarize and find sort of the arithmetic mean of what the answer is, it's like, well, we hope so, but we wouldn't be surprised if we go back to fighting with each other again when it's over. But that's okay. There's hope that maybe not have been there 6 months ago. So I don't know if I can speak to the whether or not the sort of the existential issue of Stormont, which I think goes to your question. I would choose instead to look at the potential for the devolved government, encouraged by their successful, and I don't want to say it's successful because anytime you're dealing with a health issue, it's not successful really, especially when people are still sick and people are dying, but they're encouraging response to COVID.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point, that when you're confronted with a practical emergency, people do come together, and it's really the moment in which political leaders can do an enormous amount of good if they're up to the task, up to the challenge. And so it is, I think it's that's an excellent point that yes, the politicians in the north of Ireland were able to rise to the occasion. How does that look from the point of view of British politics? Since in a sense, the sort of inward-looking turn of nationalist politics more generally, and especially the way in which Britain left the European Union. Are they, you could say, in a mood to wash their hands of all of these residual problems that they really have?
Oh, I don't. I mean, one of the things that I've learned since in my preparation, one of the nice things about the COVID lockdown is you get a chance to read a lot of things. You read a lot of history. I did. And of course, one of the things I learned was that the formal name of the Tory party is the Conservative and Unionist Party. That's that's part of their history, right? So I think generally to say, are they interested in sort of, not dealing with this? The answer would be no. It's their country. I can't speak, David, to what's going on inside internal British politics right now. I could make an educated guess that there's a lot of parallels between what's happening in the Tory party and the Labour Party and in our Republican and Democrat parties here. If I had to make that guess, it would be that because of various cultural shifts, the extreme wings of the parties are taking on more of a powerful role than the centrist wings of the party. That's certainly happening in our country. We're not surprised to see it happening in other countries. The middle is not holding, I think, is one of the terms that has been used, and certainly that presents challenges for leadership in the UK. Just to say, believe me, the most challenging position right now in the world, other than political position in the world, other than whoever's going to be the president of the United States, is Nancy Pelosi's efforts to become re-elected Speaker of the House. I've seen this with John Boehner. She has to figure out a way to get the votes of the centrists and the extremists in her own party. It was something that drove Boehner from office eventually. It's a tough job to do. And if I see parallels between that and what Boris has to deal with his own party, that's the world that we live in. And that's why I think we face some of the challenges we do. But I can't speak to the British attitude towards Northern Ireland. I know that Brandon has, again, been a pleasure to work with, as have Arlene and Michelle. In fact, their whole leadership team, I think it's, I can't remember the health minister's, Robin's party, but I know that all the major parties there sort of divvied up the various leadership positions, and they've all been very, very good to work with.
Well, in some ways, the power sharing agreement that they have is a model of how self-government might work, but it also, has its peculiar fragility.
It does. Having to do everything by consensus can be really challenging after a while.
Yeah. How do you think? How do you think they will come through it? I mean, you've been there for long enough and had enough high level exposure to everybody there. Are they going to make a go of it, or I mean, quite apart from your own sympathies and everything else, but looking at it objectively as much as you can?
I'll answer it this way. I think it will be easier to do if the economic recovery from COVID comes sooner rather than later. It's always easier to deal with prosperity than it is to deal with scarcity. Now, that being said, there are exceptions to that, and there are important exceptions to that. Some of the nastiest infighting I've ever seen in my life politically was when we had a surplus in the South Carolina budget, and people start fighting over what to do with the extra money. And sometimes scarcity can force you into compromise that you would not otherwise think possible. That being said, I think in Northern Ireland especially, and this is not unique in the world, or at least I don't think I'm breaking any ground by suggesting this, that stability breeds prosperity, prosperity breeds stability. Peace and prosperity are tied together. And the less economic opportunity people have, the more time they have to engage in other pursuits that might not be as productive. So I think that the future of the Northern Ireland government runs the same as the future of Northern Ireland, which is that if we can figure out a way, they can figure out a way to provide opportunity and stability for their folks, everyone will be better off for it.
And in that regard, you could say prioritizing the sort of pocketbook issues of economic development and so on, would have to come at the cost of at least downplaying identity politics, which is essentially what Northern Ireland politics has really been about.
It is, but one of the most interesting meetings I had, and I met with the folks from all the major parties, and then I met with some students. And not just from the students. And that was interesting because young people tend to be, I don't want to, again, tell me speak generalizingly, you'll end up painting with too broad a brush. They have the tendency to be more idealistic. They also have the ability to be more idealistic. So for a 25-year-old to say, I want to stop talking about flags and start talking about economic opportunity, that sinks in. But when it's reiterated by a 50-year-old person who's been in the job for 25 years, okay, now I get it. That maybe identity politics is something that folks over there are reevaluating. Certainly, we do it because it's easy, right? And we do the same thing. We are a red and a blue nation, but and certainly and black and white and all of those things. But it was encouraging to me to hear not only young people, but folks my own age saying, you know what, maybe this identity politics thing hasn't served us as well as we thought it might.
Well, let me ask you just a few final questions about the American perspective. First of all, your own. I was struck that you introduced the topic by explaining that you had really requested this appointment, and that can you explain a little bit about how you with your background in American politics want to devote yourself to basically helping this poor 6 counties and the other people.
No, that's not how I look at it at all. I had been involved in Irish immigration issues when I was in the House, and I became friends with Senator Mark Daley in the Republic, Senator John Deasy. You had a senator there, or they had a senator there named Parag Okeji, who used to own Air Aaron, who was a friend of mine from business school. So I had some contacts, and I was enlisted sort of encouraged by Ann Anderson, the ambassador at the time. No one else was sort of taking lead on helping, and I was a new member of Congress, so I got involved with this. And since I was a Republican and was generally perceived as being anti-immigration, which I'm not, but that's the perception, and sometimes perceptions can help. Having me be pro-immigration when it came to the Irish, they thought gave me some credibility. And I also had a lot of friends on the other side of the aisle, and still do, Brendan Boyle, Peter Welch. And so I spent a lot of time on that issue. I would go over to OMB. I run OMB for a year. The president asks me to run the CFPB at the same time. And when you get used to working 2 jobs and working 16 hours a day, and then you lose one of those jobs, as I did at CFPB, as the Senate confirmed my replacement, I had free time. And I went to the office of president and said, Mr. President, you haven't filled this Northern Irish spot yet. I know a little bit about that part of the country. I have some relationships there. And I think I can do it on a part-time basis because technically it's a part-time job. And I can't really do my full Donald Trump here over the phone. But what he said was, look, that makes perfect sense. Give me 6 months as chief, and I'll let you do that afterwards. Okay. So that's how we got to do it. Originally, it was going to be added on to OMB for a variety of reasons. That was not an opportunity after 15 months in the White House. But that's sort of how I got into it, and I'm glad I did it. So I got people say, oh, it was terrible to get fired by Donald Trump. I'm like, I don't know. I got the job that I wanted on the way out. I got to be involved in handpicking a good friend of mine to be my successor. And I have lifetime golf privileges at Trump properties around the world. Not really sure if that's getting fired. If Mike Pompeo wants to fire me today at State Department, I'd be more than happy to take that burden. Yeah. Well, also let me ask about how this fits in with overall American foreign policy. In a sense, this position, which is, you're right, we have ambassadors to Ireland and to England, but Northern Ireland is a rather unique case, and the Special Envoy is a unique title. Is that
obviously, the huge success of the Good Friday Agreement and the enormous investment of American political leadership there was just invaluable. Is this a model of how America can, in a sense, promote its interest and its principles around the world?
Well, it is. Listen,
Yeah.
I think I've worked, I've very much enjoyed working with our ambassadors, Dublin, London, and I consider myself to them in many ways. That being said, as I pointed out to Woody, I can call the president on the phone if I wanted to. Woody Johnson probably could as well. So it was a good-natured kind of rib.
Yeah.
But no, I tell people, I explain this. They said, "What's the difference between a special envoy and an ambassador?" We have special envoys for places that don't fall neatly into other sort of buckets, right? And certainly Northern Ireland, in some circumstances, could be considered that. The classic example we were thinking about was some discussion about being a special envoy to the Levant, sort of that area to Lebanon and Syria. So because there's so many things there that cross boundaries. I know that Robert O'Brien, our current national security advisor, was the hostage negotiator. Again, if you get taken hostage in Nigeria, while certainly that falls under the purview of an ambassador to Nigeria, you may not have a particular skill set to necessarily send in a specialist to do that. That's what I see a special envoy to do. So I work hand in hand with Dublin and hand in hand with London, obviously. But my office is in Belfast, and that's my first priority. And I think it's worked out fairly well so far. But there's no Dublin, London, and my office all on the same page, pulling in the same direction all the time.
Let me ask you about what you've learned in terms of, I know you mentioned at the very beginning, talking to the students on the call about a diplomatic career and so on, and what they might think about and all of that, and your background in that area. What would you say to our students in terms of what they should think about and how they should prepare themselves for such work?
Yeah, learn how to talk to people that you don't understand. Learn how to that you disagree with.
Yeah.
Diplomacy, certainly there's an aspect to diplomacy. We have natural diplomats, but a lot of what we do is learned, and it's not necessarily learned in a classroom. No offense intended.
Yeah.
It's learned in your interactions with everybody. If you can talk to somebody at your road meeting who disagrees with you, or you can talk to somebody in the class who disagrees with you, you're building the blocks necessary in other countries. Even if they agree with you, there's going to be differences, and you have to learn how to do that. I'm one of the least empathetic people in the whole world. I do not have that gene in my body, so I've had to try and figure out a different way to learn to listen to other people.
Yeah.
I'm probably a miserable diplomat, although I will say, in fact, I am a miserable diplomat. I got asked a question that you're supposed to completely dodge, and I answered. I got asked a question in London as to whether or not I thought the Irish or the British were better diplomats.
Right.
And I actually answered the question. I'm not going to tell you what the answer was because I've already gotten in trouble for it, I'm sure. But I answered the question. Sometimes you're not supposed to answer the questions. But no, one of the skill sets, there were two skill sets. I've hired thousands of people work for me over the course of my professional career. And the two things that I think that the newer generations have lost is the ability to convey thought in writing. And the ability to have civil discourse with folks they don't agree with. They can speak fine, they can articulate an argument, but they cannot put it down on a piece of paper. They cannot put it down on a memo. They lack the ability sometimes, obviously not everybody, and this is not a generational sort of criticism, to articulate that. But just as disconcerting is the inability to listen to somebody else who disagrees with them, to take that in and then try and figure out a way to respond with it or process it. I don't know how you teach it, other than teaching it to little tiny children. But I don't know how you guys do it. If you're starting from scratch in college, you're a better man than I am.
Yeah. Well, of course, one of the striking aspects of diplomacy is that it remains a highly personal business. It's in a sense, that can't really be put into a textbook, but it is something. It's like an apprenticeship, something you can learn by seeing people do it, by being part of that.
I'll give one quick example, and because I know we're wrapping up. Peter
Yeah.
Welch is a good friend of mine. Peter is a self-described socialist from Vermont, one of my best friends in Washington, D.C. And he approached me early on in my time in Congress. He knew I was a right-wing nut job. He perceived himself to be a left-wing nut job. And he walks up to me on the floor and says, I want to talk to you about a bill I'm working on. I need a Republican co-sponsor. I'm like, okay, what's the bill? He goes, I want to create a law that says that if companies come in and figure out how to save money by turning off the lights in federal buildings at night, we will let them get paid by sharing some of the savings. And I said, Peter, that's a hell of an idea of that. And why'd you come to me? He said, well, I came to you because I know you're a really tight-wadded, fiscal conservative Tea Party guy, and I'm a tree hugger. But it strikes me that this is one of the places where those two interests align. And Peter and I have continued to work together for the last 10 years. We disagree 90% of the time, but instead of focusing on that and letting that define our relationship, we focus on the 10% of the stuff we agree on and let that define our relationship. And so that's you got this for free, so it's probably worth exactly that. My anecdote, how to learn how to start dealing with people who don't necessarily agree with you all the time. Find something you agree.
It turns out being a member of Congress is an excellent preparation for being a diplomat then.
It can be if it's done properly. I've seen other folks I wouldn't let near a diplomatic situation.
Yes, right. Yes, it can be if you're a successful member. Then
there you go. There you go.
Yes. Well, final question: who's going to win the election?
I'm giving a clinical mathematic answer to that. The bottom line is I don't know, but I will lay out the case for why I think that right now it's 51-49 Donald Trump's favor. Donald Trump is going to win Arizona. I can say that without much reservation because I understand how Arizona counts. The media has not picked it up very properly. You can go to my Twitter page if you want to, at Mick Mulvaney, and see the explanation for why that is. The short answer is that it doesn't matter where the votes are from that are uncounted in Arizona. It matters when they were delivered. Arizona is unique in that they do last in, last out. And the flood of votes that came in at the last minute in that election were for Donald Trump. I think Donald Trump closes the gap in Arizona as early as tomorrow. Pennsylvania then becomes a deciding factor, assuming the president holds on in Georgia, which I don't think is 100% of the bag yet, but let's assume for sake of this discussion that Georgia is. Pennsylvania becomes the one way or the other. If he wins Pennsylvania, he wins the election. If he loses Pennsylvania, he loses the election. And the math right now is such that given if the universe of votes that's uncounted remains stable, okay, no one finds an additional 100 or 250,000 votes, but if the universe of votes that's uncounted is what it is as of today, I think Joe Biden needs 84% of those votes to make up the difference between him and Donald Trump, which I don't think is feasible. So making certain assumptions, which you have to do, I think for those reasons, Donald Trump has a slight edge to win. I can say that because I understand he's going off at 5-1 in Europe right now, maybe 6-1 in some places. So I'm looking for people to help me make legal bets in the United States or outside the United States on the president of the United States.
Well, when you were in Ireland, you should have visited Paddy Power. Paddy Power. He's all over.
I should have, but he was, but the odds were like 2-1. That's not. You give me 5 or 6-1 right now. Now I'm not gambling. That's not gambling. Is I'm not interested in gambling. This is for winning.
So. Well, look, thank you very much, Mick. This has been a wonderful conversation, and thank you for coming to Catholic University and to our Center for the Study of Statesmanship. And
thank you for what you do.
Background.
Thank you for what you do. Your school and your institution there has been a great help to my family during this lockdown. Your masses on Sunday have been a uniting theme for my family. So if you see the Cardinal Wilton, please thank him for that from some distant Roman Catholic family that he'd never see. So thanks y'all very much.
I hope we'll see you on campus after all this is over.
Would love to do that. All the best. Thanks, Justin.
Thank you
very much.
Very
thankful to both of you, Professor Walsh and Ambassador Mulvaney.